everyone, welcome back in English class. Students, have you seen the movie Mr. India? If no, then let me tell you. Mr. India is a science fiction superhero film. In this, Mr. Anil Kapoor, he played a main lead role, and orphaned as a child, Arun Verma means Anil Kapoor. He has dedicated his adult life to looking after orphaned children in a house where he is unable to afford to pay the rent nor even day-to-day expenses for necessities. So he decides to rent one of the rooms, and the tenant is a newspaper reporter named Seema Soni as Sridevi, and who happens to dislike children. Arun's dad's friend Professor Sinha means Ashok Kumar shows Arun a device that will make him invisible, and thereby he will find a way to fight to keep the house. Arun tries the device, that watch, and he becomes invisible, and using this device he is able to turn the tables on Mugambos means Mugambo's men. Mugambo, the role played by Amrish Puri, and he becomes and he calls himself Mr. India. Mr. India becomes popular with the masses, and people everywhere rejoice and claim him to be their new savior. No one knows that Mr. India is Arun save for Jugal. So it's a science fiction movie, and it was the blockbuster movie of at that time. So here the question arises in my mind: if I would get such a power to be an invisible, if I would get such kind of invisibility, what would I like to do? Suppose I would like to make prank with others. I would like to go wherever I want to without telling to anyone, or whatever I would like to do. Means so many humorous things, or so many funny things, and so many interesting things are there to do. If you would get, or if I would get the power to become invisible. So now I'm just asking from you all that what you all would do if suppose you would get the power to be an invisible man or woman, invisible boy or invisible girl. So okay, exactly why am I talking about this invisibility and all? The novel that we are going to discuss, the chapter we are going to discuss, this is based on the same plot. We are going to do chapter number 5, Footprints Without Feet, written by H.G. Wells. The author we have here of this chapter, Herbert George Wells, means H.G. Wells. He is an English writer. He was prolific in many genres, writing dozens of novels, short stories, and works of social commentary, satire, biography, and autobiography, and even 2 books on recreational war games. And he is now best remembered for his science fiction novels, and is often called the father of science fiction, along with Jules Verne and Hugo Gernsback. And Footprints Without Feet is also an interesting science fiction story. The title of the story is quite attractive, and it has been aptly chosen as the main title for his collection of stories. And the present story that we have centers around a scientist named Griffin, who has invented a method whereby a man can become invisible. He experiments on himself and swallows some kind of drugs to make his body transparent like a sheet of glass. The author narrates some episodes which take place because of his invisibility. The feelings of his awe, surprise, and shock are aroused among the citizens as his invisible body moves around the city. So as you know, students, we are talking about the novel The Invisible Man. It's a science fiction novel written by H.G. Wells, originally serialized in Pearson's Weekly in 1897. It was published as a novel the same year. The Invisible Man, the title refers to is Griffin, a scientist who has devoted himself to research into optics and invents a way to change a body's refractive index to that of air so that it neither absorbs or nor reflects light and thus becomes invisible. The scientist successfully carries out this procedure on himself but fails on in his attempt to reverse it. An enthusiast of random and irresponsible violence, Griffin has become an iconic character in horror fiction. So, the novel we have here, The Invisible Man, it's about a mysterious man, Griffin. Griffin arrives at the local inn owned by Mr. and Mrs. Hall of the English village of Iping, West Sussex, during a snowstorm. The stranger wears a long-sleeved, thick coat and gloves. His face is hidden entirely by bandages except for a fake pink nose, and he wears a wide-brimmed hat. He demands to be left alone and spends most of his time in his rooms working with a set of chemicals and laboratory apparatus, only venturing out at night. So now students, come on, let's read and find out how he uses or misuses his powers for his own. The chapter we have here, it started from these lines. The two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house and in the middle of London? And where was the man exactly? As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. Remarkable? Why? A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. Further, footprints followed one after another, but nobody was there, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter, and at last disappeared altogether. How interesting it is. So, two boys, suddenly they noticed a few muddy imprints of bare feet. So students, the chapter we have here, it's an extract taken from the novel, as we have talked earlier, An Invisible Man. The main novel name is An Invisible Man, and this chapter is an extract taken from that novel. So it's a story about a Griffin, a scientist, a stubborn kind of scientist. He was trying to invent the rarest drug, and finally he did so, but nobody was there to do the experiment, so he drank that solution and he made himself invisible. That formula was successful, but now his body was invisible. So the chapter we have here, it's starting from that point where the formula is already invented by the Griffin, and he is now invisible, and he got this idea to make pranks on other. So he fought with the landlord, the landowner where he used to staying in that house. So he was a tenant exactly, and the the owner of that house, he was always irritating to Griffin. So what he did, he set the whole house of that landowner on fire, and he ran away from that place, and he was trying to hide himself from everybody. So he kept all the clothes at the house, because if he would wear clothes, then clothes would be visible to the people. So he kept all the clothes and he moved out in that chilled weather with naked body. So but his body is invisible, so nobody can see him. So the chapter we have here, it's going to start from that moment when he ran away from that house after making the whole house set on fire. So the two boys, they suddenly noticed a few muddy imprints of bare feet. They started wondering that what is this? What was a barefoot man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London when the weather is just killing? It's badly chilled weather. It's freezing cold there. They also started thinking that where was the man exactly, and as he was nowhere to be seen, nobody was there, but footprints were appearing. So they suddenly saw another footmark. One by one the footmarks, they were imprinting on the floor, but nobody was there. The man was still not visible. So they started following the footprints. They followed them until the footprints became invisible. They had been following a scientist who had discovered how to make the human body transparent or invisible. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. Griffin, the scientist, had carried out an experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass. True, it also remained as solid as glass. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer, without clothes, without money, and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. So see how interesting it is. It was Griffin. Who it was? The barefoot man. It was Griffin, the scientist who had been working for a long time to see how to make the human body invisible. And suddenly one day he consumed certain kind of drugs which made his body invisible, though it could be felt. Griffin was a lawless person, and as he had once burned down the house of his landlord, who was trying to throw him out of the house, and then, as he wanted to be invisible, he had to remove his clothes, then roam around without clothes and without money. His presence was felt after he stepped in some mud, and his footprints could be seen as he walked. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London, but his adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter. The air was bitterly cold and he could not do without the clothes. So it was very tough time for the Griffin. He easily escaped the boys who had followed him, but he had many more adventures coming up. Because first of all, he had chosen a bad time to wander in London street, as it was bitterly cold. It was winter season going on and the air was harshly cold, we can say. He decided to stay inside a store for warmth. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. Closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes, soon with shoes and overcoat and a wide brimmed hat, and he became fully dressed and visible person now. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning, and when he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and he began to run. So what happened exactly? He intruded himself in a mall. So but because it was very chilled weather to stay outside without the clothes, so he decided to stay inside the store for warmth. So as he went inside the store, the closing time arrived and the doors of the store were shut, and now nobody was there inside, and Griffin was all alone and free to do whatever he wanted. So first of all, he got food to eat and wore new clothes, warm clothes, without thinking or without paying for. He became visible again as he wore shoes, and now he was fully dressed: overcoat, hat, shoes, and overcoat, new clothes, shirt, pant, everything. He then found cold meat and coffee in the kitchen restaurant and ate them, and after that he had also sweets and wine from the grocery store. Then he slept on the pile of quilts and kept nearby and could not wake up on time. His plan was to run away from the mall when in the morning the store would be reopened by the servants. So it was his plan to wake up on time, and when they would reopen the store, he would stealthily ran away from that place. But the plan did not went like as per he was thinking. Next morning, when the assistants came and they started approaching him, they saw that somebody was there inside the mall and somebody was sleeping there on the pile of quilts, and the whole mall was just like it was totally messy from inside. So they judged something that something was wrong, and when they saw that somebody was sleeping, so Griffin, he also looked at the servants. They were already inside and he was sleeping, so he became totally nervous at that moment and he started running away here and there. So then the assistant started chasing him as well. He escaped only because he quickly removed his new clothes. Again, he was invisible and naked, but was free now, but side by side without any money in the chill air of January. They naturally gave chase. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So once more he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. This time he decided to try the stock of the theatrical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulders. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages round his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat. And to escape without being seen, he callously attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him of all the money he could find. So see, somehow he managed himself free. He made himself free from the escape of the mall men, from the servants of the mall. But now again the same problem arises. The problem remains same now for him, because his body was again naked, because he made himself naked to set himself free from those men, those servants of the mall. So but his body was shivering. He was feeling so bad. His body was feeling so cold, but he was not having money. He was not having any shelter. So now he again made a plan. Next morning, when he ran up from that mall. So this time he decided to try the clothing of the theatrical world, as he knew that he would surely find something there to cover his face with, because the problem he was facing, that if he would try to wear any clothes, his face was totally empty, his face was transparent. The people, for the people, they, if they would see a man without a face, they would totally behave crazily, or totally behave insanely. So he was searching something to find something to hide or to cover up his face. So finally he made a plan to move inside, to invade inside a theatrical world. As he was shivering with the cold, and he was in the mood, or he was in here in the hope that I would find surely something here inside to cover up my face as well. So he found a shop first of all according to his needs, and he entered it. He came out now wearing bandages around his forehead. So what he did, he covered his whole face with the bandages so that people would not show insane kind of behavior while watching to himself. So he covered his whole face with the bandages, and he also stick one false nose as at the place of his nose, and he used side whiskers and a hat. Now he was seeming like that something or somebody was there, so his face was visible now. And then, as he did not have the money, he attacked a shopkeeper, because he was trying to move outside of that shop after wearing all those clothes and things, but he was not in the mood to pay for all that thing, and he was moreover he was not having money also, he was out of money. So he attacked on the shopkeeper, robbed him all of his money, and then he felt that London was too crowded and decided to go to a now small village nearby Iping. So his plan was now to move to a town, to a small village, to think about the future, that what exactly he shall do now to make a better future. So guys, here we have done this mysterious story, the first part, and rest of the story we'll discuss later, and we'll find out later in our next session that how he would try to make the village people fool, what kind of plan he would make now, and what kind of prank he would now play with those simple villagers, those naive villagers. So let's discuss the rest of the part later. Till then, take care of yourself. Thank you.